The porch light on Dogwood Lane had been dead for 3 days, and on that cool October evening, with the smell of wet oak leaves and someone's charcoal grill drifting up the street, a man in a grey hoodie stood on a stepladder trying to fix it. He was 61 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a close silver haircut and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He held a small Phillips screwdriver between his teeth while he worked the fixture loose, and every minute or so he stopped, pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket, checked the screen, and put it back. He was waiting for a call. The most important call of his life, if he was honest about it, and he was a man who tried very hard to be honest about things. His name was Terence Boone. He had lived in the town of Merritt Falls, North Carolina, for exactly 11 days. The moving boxes were still stacked in his garage, labeled in his wife's neat handwriting, and the house still smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. Deborah was in Atlanta until Thursday, helping their daughter with a new baby. So it was just Terence, a dead porch light, a screwdriver, and a phone that would not ring. The reception inside the house was terrible. 1 bar in the kitchen, nothing in the den. Out here on the porch he had 4 bars, so out here he stayed, pacing sometimes, checking the phone, climbing back up the ladder, coming back down. Up the street, a teenage girl named Deja Freeman sat on her own porch steps, with earbuds in, half watching him, half watching a video on her phone, thinking the new neighbor sure was jumpy about something. At 6:52, a Merritt Falls police cruiser turned onto Dogwood Lane, moving slow. Its headlights swept across the wet pavement, across the mailboxes, across a man in a grey hoodie standing in the shadows of a darkened porch, reaching into his pocket. The cruiser stopped. Terence Boone would later say that he heard the car door before he saw the man. That heavy, deliberate chunk of a police door closing, a sound he knew from 100 bases and 100 checkpoints in his life. He came down off the ladder, screwdriver in his right hand, and turned toward the street. The officer coming up his walkway was maybe 40, thick through the chest, with a flashlight already up even though there was plenty of dusklight left. The beam hit Terence full in the face. The nameplate on his uniform read Sloan. Officer Derek Sloan had been on the Merritt Falls force for 14 years. He had 11 complaints in his file, all of them marked unfounded, all of them from people whose word had been weighed against his and found lighter. He had a way of standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt that made even a routine conversation feel like a warning. And he had a rule he liked to tell rookies, usually in the parking lot after shift, with a toothpick working the corner of his mouth. "You establish control in the first 10 seconds, he would say, or you spend the whole stop trying to get it back." He established control now. He said, "Drop what's in your hand and step off that porch." Terence set the screwdriver down on the porch rail, slow and visible, the way he had taught 19-year-old lance corporals to do at checkpoints half a world away. He kept his hands loose at his sides, palms slightly forward. He said, "Evening, officer. Something wrong? Got a report of a male casing houses on this street, reaching into his pockets, loitering around a dark residence." Sloane's flashlight moved down Terence's body and back up. "Step off the porch. This is my residence," Terence said. His voice was even, unhurried, a voice used to being listened to. Though Sloane did not hear that part. "I closed on this house on the 10th. My name's Terence Boone. I've been fixing my porch light." "Uh-huh." Sloane came closer, and now Terence could smell him, cigarettes and spearmint gum layered over each other. "You got ID?" "I do. My wallet's inside on the kitchen counter. My phone's in my front pocket." "You tell me which one you want, and how you want me to get it, and that's exactly what I'll do." That should have been the end of it. Any reasonable officer walks the man to his door, watches him produce a wallet, sees the address, says, "Have a good night. Sorry to bother you." Daisy Freeman, up the street, had pulled out one earbud. Something about the flashlight, the angle of the two men, made her sit up straighter. Sloane didn't move toward the door. He tilted his head. "Whose house is this, really?" "I beg your pardon. You heard me." The flashlight came up under Terence's chin like an interrogation lamp. 61 Dogwood. I've patrolled this street 11 years. I know who lives on this street." He let that sit for a second, and then he said the thing that would be played on cable news for 6 straight weeks, the thing that would be read aloud in a federal courtroom while a jury sat very still. He said, "A man like you doesn't live on a street like this. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and you're going to lose the attitude. Whose house is this?" Up the street, Daisy Freeman raised her phone and started recording. Camera 1. Terence Boone took a slow breath through his nose. In 61 years, he had heard some version of that sentence in every accent America makes. He had heard it at 18 outside a movie theater in Memphis, and at 35 in a rental car office in San Diego, while wearing a flight jacket with his name stitched on it. He had a procedure for it, refined over decades, and the procedure was patience. "Officer," he said, "I understand you're doing your job. I'm going to help you do it. There is a doorbell camera 2 feet to my left that recorded me carrying groceries into this house at 4 o'clock today. My deed is inside. My driver's license is inside. My wife's begonias, which I did not want, are in that window box. I am not going to argue with you. I am not going to raise my voice, and I am not going to reach for anything until you tell me to. Now, what would you like me to do?" For just a moment, something flickered across Derek Sloane's face. Later, in the body cam footage, an FBI analyst would freeze it and study it. It was the look of a man who has heard something that doesn't fit his story and has half a second to decide whether to adjust the story or bury the evidence. He buried it. "What I'd like," Sloane said, "is for you to stop talking like you're in charge here. That's the problem with you people. Somebody gives you a little vocabulary and you think it's a badge." He keyed his shoulder mic. 14. I'm out at 61 Dogwood with a subject. Possible 1031. Send me a second unit." Then to Terence. "Turn around. Hands on the rail. Am I being detained?" "You're being detained. On what suspicion?" "On suspicion of I said so." Terence turned around. He put his hands on the porch rail he had power washed 2 days earlier. The wood was still damp from the afternoon rain and cold under his palms, and a moth was beating itself against the dead porch light above his head. And somewhere down the street, a screen door banged, and he thought very clearly, "Stay smooth, old man. You have survived worse than this fool." Deborah gets back Thursday. Just get to Thursday. And that was when the phone in his hoodie pocket began to vibrate. He had been waiting 4 hours for that call. Reflex beat judgment by a quarter of a second. His right hand came off the rail and moved toward his pocket, and he said, "Officer, that's my phone. I need to." He never finished the sentence. "Gun! Hands! Hands!" Sloane's voice cracked up an octave, and there was a rip of Velcro, and Terence turned his head just enough to see the yellow plastic body of the taser come up, and he had time to say the word, "Wait." The 2 probes hit him in the back from 5 feet away. One buried itself below his left shoulder blade. The other missed high and thudded into the white doorframe, punching a small dark hole in the fresh paint. 50,000 volts do not care what you have survived. Terence Boone's body locked, every muscle firing at once, and the porch tilted, and he went down hard onto his own porch boards, chin striking wood, glasses skittering off his forehead into the begonias. And in the roaring 5 seconds that followed, while his muscles seized and his teeth clenched, his mind did the thing it sometimes still did. The thing the VA counselor called intrusion. He was not on a porch in North Carolina. He was face down in Fallujah in November of 2004, ears ringing, mortar dust in his mouth, screaming at a 20-year-old radio operator to keep his head down. Then the current stopped, and the oak trees came back, and the charcoal smell came back, and a knee was grinding into his spine, and cold steel ratcheted around his wrists, and a voice above him was saying, calm down, like Terence was the one making noise. The phone kept vibrating in his pocket. 4 times. 5. Then it stopped. Up the street, Deja Freeman was on her feet now, phone steady, and she was yelling, "That's his house! Hey, that's his house! He just moved in! Maham, assault herself all! My mom took him a pie!" Her voice is clear as a bell on the recording. So is Sloane's answer. "Get back inside before I find a reason for you too." The doorbell camera caught it all from 2 feet away. Camera 2. It caught the tasing, the fall, the knee, and it caught something else. Something small at the 11-minute mark of its recording. When Sloane hauled Terence up to a sitting position against the porch post, the collar of the grey hoodie pulled sideways, and a steel bead chain slid out, and 2 dog tags swung free and caught the last of the daylight. The bodycam footage shows Sloane's flashlight land on them. Boone, TAUSMC. And for 4 full seconds, Derek Sloane does not move. 14 years earlier, Derek Sloane had stood in the rain at Jacksonville Memorial Gardens and watched 2 Marines in dress blues fold a flag over his father's casket, crisp and slow, 13 folds, and hand it to his mother. He had joined the department 3 months later because the Corps had turned him down, and that was the wound under everything, though he'd never once said it out loud. On the footage you can see his hand come up, almost gentle, almost reaching to tuck the tags back in. You can see the exact moment he could have knelt down and said, "Sir, I've made a mistake." The moment sat there, open, for 4 seconds. Then a second cruiser turned onto Dogwood Lane, lights spinning, and the moment closed like a fist. "Sit tight, Jarhead," Sloane said, and dropped the tags against Terence's chest, and stood up to meet his backup, already rebuilding the story in his head, already rehearsing the word's furtive movement and refused commands. The second officer was young, maybe 26, with her dark hair pinned tight under her cap. Her nameplate read, Whitfield. Officer Dana Whitfield, 8 months out of the academy, and her body camera was on and recording from the moment she left her vehicle, because she was 8 months out of the academy and still did everything by the book. Camera 3. She came up the walk and saw a handcuffed man in his 60s sitting against a porch post with taser wires still trailing off his back, blood on his chin, breathing slow and controlled through his nose. And she saw a stepladder and a screwdriver on the porch rail and an open toolbox and a dead porch light with its fixture hanging loose, and window boxes with begonias in them. "What do we got?" she asked, and her voice on the recording is careful. "Attempted B&E, resisting, went for a weapon," Sloane said. "Had a screwdriver on him, tried to pull something out of his pocket." Whitfield looked in the toolbox. She looked at the ladder. She looked at the fixture hanging out of the wall on its wires, clearly mid-repair. On her body cam, you can hear her say quietly, "He was fixing the light, Derek. He was casing the house." His house? We don't know it's his house. And then, from the ground, calm as still water, Terence Boone spoke for the first time since he'd been tased. His mouth was bleeding. His shoulder was on fire. His hands were numb behind his back. And every word came out level and precise, because he had briefed generals and testified before Congress and buried Marines, and if his voice was going to break, it was not going to break for Derek Sloan. "Officer Whitfield," he said, reading her name plate. "In my right front pocket is a phone. It has been ringing. In my left back pocket is a slim card wallet I carry when I'm working around the house. I would consider it a professional courtesy if you would remove it and read what's inside. Out loud, please, so your camera hears it." Sloan said, "You don't give instructions here." But Whitfield was already crouching down. Maybe it was the word professional. Maybe it was the dog tags. Maybe it was 8 months of instinct telling her that her whole career was going to be defined by the next 60 seconds. She pulled the slim wallet from his back pocket and opened it, and her flashlight settled on the cards inside, and the footage shows the beam go perfectly still. The first card was a retired military identification card, the kind with the pale blue stripe. She read it out loud, just like he asked, and her voice changed shape halfway through. "Boone, Terence A." A pause. "Major General, United States Marine Corps, retired." The porch got very quiet. The moth ticked against the dead light. Down the street, Deja's camera zoomed in. "Keep going," Terence said gently. The second card was cream-colored with a blue eagle seal, and Whitfield read that one slower, like her mouth didn't want to finish it. "Terence A. Boone, Under Secretary Designate." She swallowed. "United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Under Secretary Designate, meaning nominated by the President of the United States, meaning his confirmation vote had been scheduled in the United States Senate for 6 o'clock that evening, and the call he had been waiting for on his porch, the call that had gotten him tased on his own porch boards, was the call telling him the result. "Officer Whitfield," Terence said, "would you please take my phone out of my pocket and look at the missed calls?" She did, and on her body cam footage, which 40 million people would eventually watch, you can see the screen plain as day. 6 missed calls, the first 5 from a Colonel R. Vasquez, the 6th from a number the phone's caller ID rendered in 3 words. White House switchboard. There is a particular silence that the human body makes when it understands, all at once, that it has ruined itself. Derek Sloan made that silence now. The footage shows him standing with his thumbs still hooked in his belt, frozen in his control posture like a museum exhibit, and his face going through it in stages. Confusion first, then arithmetic, then a kind of grey falling blankness, the look of a man watching his pension, his badge, his name, and 14 years of "I said so" slide off a cliff in the dark. "That's," he started. "Anybody can print her." The phone rang again in Whitfield's hand. Colonel R. Vasquez, 7th attempt, and Terence Boone, sitting handcuffed and bleeding on his own porch, said the sentence that would become the headline. The sentence Dacia's video would be titled with. The sentence printed on the front page of the Raleigh paper, 2 days later above the fold. He said, "Officer, you should answer that. The Pentagon does not like to be kept waiting, and neither does the White House." Whitfield answered it. She said, "Hello, this is Officer Dana Whitfield, Merritt Falls Police," and then she didn't say anything else for a long time. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Rita Vasquez, General Boone's aide of 6 years, a woman who had spent the last 40 minutes escalating a missed phone call the way only a Marine colonel can. She had already called the general's wife. She had already called the Merritt Falls watch commander, who had cheerfully informed her that the only active call on Dogwood Lane was a suspicious person detained at number 61, and she had already, upon hearing that, made 2 more phone calls, one to the Marine Corps liaison at the FBI's Charlotte field office, and one to a Deputy Assistant Attorney General who owed the General a favor from a congressional hearing in 2019. On the body cam, you can only hear Whitfield's half of the conversation. It goes like this. "Yes, ma'am. He's here, ma'am. He's been detained." Pause. "There was a use of force." Long pause. "A taser, ma'am." And then a pause so long that the only sound is the moth and Sloane's breathing. And then Whitfield says very quietly, "Yes, ma'am. Understood, ma'am," and lowers the phone and looks at Sloane. And her face is the face of a person standing next to a car accident. "Take the cuffs off him," she said. "Right now." He resisted. "Derek." Her voice dropped. "That was his aide, a full colonel. She says the FBI is already rolling from Charlotte, and the chief is being called at home right now. And the man you tased is a 2-star general the president nominated to run half the VA, and his confirmation vote was tonight, and he was standing on his own porch." She stepped past him and knelt behind Terence with her handcuff key. "Sir, I'm removing these. You have injuries. I'm calling EMS." "Thank you, Officer Whitfield," Terence said. "For the record, you've conducted yourself properly." The cuffs came off. Terence brought his hands slowly around front and looked at the deep red grooves in his wrists, flexing his fingers to get the blood back. The taser probe was still hooked in his shoulder, wire trailing. He did not look at Sloane. That was somehow the worst part, Sloane would tell his union rep later. The man never once looked at him, the way you don't look at weather. "General," Whitfield said, and it was the first time anyone on that porch had used the word out loud, and Sloane flinched at it like a slap. "Is there anything you need, sir?" "2 things, Terence said. He picked his reading glasses up out of the begonias, checked them for cracks, and folded them into his pocket. "First, nobody touches my doorbell camera. Second," he nodded at his phone, "I'd like to return a call to the White House. I believe they have news for me." He made the call sitting on his own porch steps, blood drying on his chin, while a fire department ambulance turned onto Dogwood Lane. Half the neighborhood was on their lawns by then. Deja was still filming, and the doorbell camera picked up the moment, later slowed down, and replayed on every network in the country. When Terence Boone listened to the voice on the other end, closed his eyes for 2 seconds, and said, "Thank you. Yes. It's been an eventful evening. I'll be there Monday." 58 minutes after the taser fired, the first 2 black Suburbans turned onto Dogwood Lane. They came in quiet, no sirens, which somehow made it worse. Behind them came a third, and behind that an unmarked Charger, and the vehicles stopped in a staggered line that blocked the street in both directions, and the doors opened almost in unison, and out stepped 6 people in dark suits under raid jackets, 3 letters in gold on their backs, and Dogwood Lane, which had never seen anything more dramatic than a raccoon in a trash can, went absolutely silent. The woman leading them was in her 50s, compact, grey streak in her hair, credentials already out. Special Agent in Charge. Marlene Okafor, FBI, Charlotte Field Office, who had been eating dinner with her family when the call came, and who had personally driven 3 hours at speeds she declined to specify. She walked past Sloane's cruiser without looking at it, walked up to the porch, and stopped at the bottom of the steps where a paramedic was taping gauze over the probe wound on Terence's shoulder. "General Boone, Marlene Okafor, FBI. Sir, on behalf of the Bureau, I want you to know this is now a federal civil rights investigation, effective 90 minutes ago, opened at the direction of the Deputy Attorney General. We have jurisdiction. We are taking it. I appreciate the speed, Agent Okafor. Sir, the Deputy Attorney General also asked me to pass along her congratulations. I understand the vote was 78 to 20. It was. Then as of tonight, you're a presidential appointee. Confirmed, which makes the assault on you a matter of particular federal interest. She turned, slowly, and looked at Derek Sloan for the first time. He was standing by his cruiser with his arms crossed, and he had been rehearsing his account for an hour. Furtive movement, refused verbal commands, feared for my safety. And he opened his mouth to begin it. Officer Sloan, Okafor said, before you say one word, I want to make sure you understand your situation, because I extend that courtesy to everyone. There are 3 cameras. The victim's doorbell camera recorded the entire encounter with audio from a distance of 2 feet. A minor witness across the street recorded 4 minutes of video which has already been provided to my agents by her mother. And your own body camera, which you believed you had deactivated, was in buffer mode and captured everything from 30 seconds before you exited your vehicle. She let that land. 3 cameras, officer. 3 angles. Full audio. Including the sentence about what kind of man lives on what kind of street. So, would you still like to tell me about the furtive movement? Sloane's mouth stayed open. Nothing came out of it. Turn around, please, Okafor said. Hands behind your back. You can't. I'm a police officer. I was performing my duties. I get due process. I get a union rep. You can't just... You are entitled to due process, and you will receive exactly as much of it as the law requires, which I note is considerably more than General Boone received on his own porch. Turn around. This is insane. He reached for his pocket. You weren't there. Sloane's voice was climbing, cracking, and he looked around the street for an ally, and found lawns full of his own neighbors of 11 years, standing silent, filming. And he looked at Whitfield, and she looked at the ground. And he looked, finally, at Terence Boone. General, he said, and the word came out strangled. Sir, my father was in the cause. He was at Khe-Sanh, sir. I didn't know. If I'd known who you were... Terence stood up off the steps. The paramedic tried to steady him, and he waved her off politely. He came down onto the walkway, slow because his back was seizing, and he stood in front of Derek Sloan, and for the first time all night, he looked directly at him. On the footage, the 2 men are almost exactly the same height. That's the whole problem, son, Terence said. Right there in your own sentence, if you'd known who I was. He let it breathe. You don't get to tase the ones you think are nobody. There isn't anybody who's nobody. Your father knew that. They teach it at Khe-Sanh, real thorough. Sloan turned around and put his hands behind his back. On camera 3, Whitfield's camera, you can hear the ratchet of the cuffs, the same brand, the same sound, and you can see that they cuffed him on the walkway of 61 Dogwood Lane, 6 feet from where he had cuffed the general. And you can see, if you look closely, that Derek Sloan was crying, and that nobody on that street moved to comfort him, and that one of the FBI agents put a hand flat on his head to guide him into the Suburban, gentle and impersonal. Procedure all the way down. Chief Randall Price of the Merritt Falls Police Department arrived 4 minutes later in a golf shirt, having been pulled off his back porch by a phone call from the town manager, who had been called by the county sheriff, who had been called by Colonel Vasquez, who was already on a plane. The chief's evening proceeded as follows. At 9:15, he watched the doorbell footage on an agent's tablet, standing in the general's driveway, and the footage of him watching it, captured by Deja from across the street, shows him take his cap off halfway through and just hold it. At 9:40, he formally suspended Officer Derek Sloan, who was already in federal custody and thus not present to hear it. At 10:05, he attempted to apologize to General Boone and got out one sentence before the general stopped him. "Chief, I don't need your apology tonight. I need your files. Every complaint ever filed against that man, unredacted, on Agent Okafor's desk by Friday. Then we'll talk about apologies." The chief said, "Yes, sir." It did not seem to occur to him until later that he had answered a civilian in a blood-stained hoodie the way a lieutenant answers a general, and that everyone on the street had heard him do it. By midnight, Doja Freeman's video had 400,000 views. By sunrise, it had 9 million. By Tuesday, the 3 angles had been synchronized side by side by a video editor in Ohio, doorbell on the left, Deja in the middle, body cam on the right, so that you could watch the taser fire from 3 directions at once. And that version passed 40 million views, and the sentence "a man like you doesn't live on a street like this" had been printed on protest signs in 11 cities. What happened over the following 14 months happened the way institutional consequences happen, which is to say slowly, on paper, in rooms with bad carpet. But it happened, and the numbers are all public record. Derek Sloan was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of deprivation of rights under color of law. Faced with 3 cameras and the testimony of his own backup officer, his attorneys negotiated. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. At sentencing, the judge noted that the defendant had been given, in his own body camera footage, 4 full seconds of visible hesitation, 4 seconds in which he looked at a Marine's dog tags and could have stopped, and had chosen not to. Those 4 seconds, the judge said, were the difference between a mistake and a decision. He was decertified as a law enforcement officer in North Carolina and 41 other states through the national database. His pension was forfeited. His wife filed for divorce in the spring. The town of Merritt Falls, population 11,000, settled the civil suit for $6.3 million, the largest settlement in county history. Terrence Boone kept none of it beyond his legal costs. $4.1 million funded a permanent de-escalation and constitutional policing training center at the community college in Jacksonville, open to every department in the eastern part of the state. First come, first served, free. The rest established a scholarship fund. The chief retired 8 months in, 3 days before a Department of Justice pattern and practice report found that Merritt Falls officers had detained black residents at 4 times the rate of white residents over the prior decade. His replacement, hired from outside, made body cameras mandatory and non-deactivatable, wrote a duty to intervene policy into the department manual, and personally reopened all 11 of the complaints in Derek Sloan's file. 3 officers resigned during that review rather than answer questions under oath. Their badges, plus Sloan's, made 4. Officer Dana Whitfield received a formal commendation, which she almost did not accept, and a torrent of anonymous letters, some calling her a hero, some calling her a rat. She stayed. She is a sergeant now. She teaches the academy block on lawful detention, and she begins every class the same way, by playing 60 seconds of her own body cam footage and telling the room, "This is me. This is the night I learned that the camera is not there to protect you from them. It's there to protect you from yourself." And Terrence Boone was sworn in as Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs on a Monday morning in Washington, with his left shoulder still bandaged under his suit. He gave exactly 1 press conference about Merritt Falls, at his wife's insistence that he say it once and never again. He stood at the podium without notes, and reporters expected a speech about race in America, and instead he said this, in 51 seconds, and then took no questions. "I served this country for 34 years, I've been shot at on 3 continents. I have been afraid many times, in many places. But the only time in my life I was ever put on the ground in my own country was on my own porch, with my own screwdriver under my own dead porch light, waiting for a phone call from the White House. Now I got up. I had 3 cameras, a colonel, and the Justice Department. Most folks who go down like that have none of those things. So don't ask me how I feel. Ask what happens to the ones with no cameras. That's my testimony. That's all of it. Then he went inside and ran a department of 400,000 employees, and by all accounts ran it well, and declined every interview request about that October night for the rest of his tenure, including one from a streaming service that offered 7 figures. His aide, Colonel Vasquez, is said to have laughed for a full minute before hanging up. There is one more thing, and it is small, and it is the reason the people on Dogwood Lane tell this story the way they do. The following October, almost a year to the day, on a cool evening that smelled like wet oak leaves and somebody's charcoal, Terence Boone came home from Washington for the weekend, and after dinner he went out to the porch with his toolbox. The porch light had been fixed for months, of course. An electrician had seen to it that first week. But the bulb had burned out again, the way bulbs do, and Deborah had left it on the counter with a sticky note, and some jobs a man wants to do himself. He set up the step-ladder. He put the little Phillips screwdriver between his teeth out of pure habit, laughed at himself, and took it out. Up the street, Deja Freeman was on her own porch with a stack of study guides, because there was a Naval Academy application on her desk, with a letter of recommendation attached, signed in blue ink by a retired Major General. And she raised one hand without looking up, and he raised one hand back. He swapped the bulb. The light came on warm and yellow, and the first moth arrived inside of a minute, ticking softly against the glass. Terence stood on the ladder a moment longer. Just below the light, in the white paint of the doorframe, there was a small, dark hole, no bigger than a pencil eraser, where the second taser probe had buried itself a year ago. The electrician had offered to fill it. The painter had offered to fill it. Deborah had stopped offering and started pretending not to see it, which after 39 years of marriage was its own kind of understanding. He reached out and ran his thumb over it once, the way you check a scar. Then he folded the ladder, picked up his toolbox, and went inside. And the door closed, and the porch light stayed on over Dogwood Lane, burning steady in the dark, the way it should have been burning all along.